I saw him text her all the time, but I didn't think that they had a relationship like that.
It's sort of impossible to understand what happened because it's so far from, acceptable human behavior.
The trial of a Plainville woman accused of encouraging her friend to kill himself through text messages is now underway.
We're all left wondering what happened. Now we have this opportunity to see inside their minds.
One level of the conversation is a kid that's going to kill himself. And then there's another level that's a romantic fantasy.
The question is, can you cause someone else to commit suicide?
She keeps at him, Your Honor, at him and at him.
The defendant's own words. His death was my fault. I told him to get back in.
Mr. Roy himself stated, "I want to die."
She thought she was doing absolutely the right thing. It's a perfect storm of a tragedy.
My next guest is a journalist based in Los Angeles. He writes for the New York Times Magazine, Esquire, and GQ. You've probably seen him in I Love You, Now Die, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts versus Michelle Carter. His name is Jesse Barron. Jesse, I told you off here how blessed and fortunate I am to have you on the show today. I'll say it again. Jesse, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Derek.
So, Jesse, I have to say a lot of your writing is crime-based. I mean, you write for, I read off who you write for. Very impressive. How did you stumble across crime and why crime? Obviously, the crime movies are a big hit with people. People love the idea of it. What's the chord that has been struck in you, and why do you write about it?
Well, I came to this story, because I grew up in a suburb of Boston, about an hour north of where this took place, and I read an article in the fall before I started reporting, which would have been the fall of 2016, in one of the South Coast daily newspapers, and it was just a clip. It was just a clip about the suicide of a young man and the indictment of his girlfriend. And I knew that would be, a story that contained a lot of mysteries that newspaper story didn't reveal. And so I started going to pretrial hearings in the winter, and these were held at this courthouse in Taunton, Massachusetts, in the center of Massachusetts. And I started to get, closer and closer to the story. And I guess what I saw that I try to always look for in a story is there has to be something that you don't understand initially and that you can't understand, no matter how much you think about it. So, I don't write a ton of these kind of true crime stories, but I do write about, financial fraud and that kind of crime.
Right.
And I'm always interested in how people who don't play by the same rules that we all consensually agree to play for live, and what happens when someone steps outside of the consensual bounds that we all live by. And, financial fraud is a great example of that. And the Michelle Carter case is like the ultimate example of that, of someone who, on the face of it, has sort of trespassed beyond the bounds of acceptable human behavior. And it's an invitation to understand why. It's an invitation into that mystery.
So I have to say, you're clearly passionate about what you do. I also grew up in Massachusetts, which is why I'm so outside of the documentary, which was so superiorly done. Where in Massachusetts did you? What suburb? I'm outside of Springfield. Whereabouts are you? Where were you?
Oh, okay. I grew up in Brookline.
Oh, okay. I went to Northeastern. So what a small.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah, what a small world, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, and I have to say, so. This documentary comes out, and I'm so happy that you're from Massachusetts because I think that made you understand it more. Plus, you're just a great reporter. Understand it more than most people. when this first came out, Jesse, it was go kill yourself. I'm summarizing here, but go kill yourself, go die. And what this documentary does, especially part 2, is it paints a much bigger picture of what happened. And I wish people that were involved with the case almost knew that, like people that saw it know it now. Does that make any sense?
Mm-hmm. It does, yeah.
Do you think that would have changed things if people kind of knew the bigger picture that existed?
That's a good question. I think that the big picture would have gotten lost even if it had been conveyed before the trial, because the story that was getting told is too powerful, too much momentum, too many headlines, too many retweets, too many Facebook posts, unstoppable juggernaut of a story, teen blonde ice queen kills boyfriend to win the attention of her peers. I mean, it's an irresistible fable. And so I think even if a more complex picture like we do in the documentary had come out during the summer of 2017, it would have been washed away beneath the kind of, just relentlessly crashing wave of that story, which is much more hooky and much more compelling.
Right.
On the face of it.
Yeah. Do you think that the way the media first portrayed it, because they made her look exactly like you said, the ice queen, the awful person, right off the bat. And if Erin Lee Carr, who phenomenally put this together,
She's great.
Yes, fantastic. Was able to put it together the way she did. Why couldn't journalists have done the same thing? Is it because it's just a better story to leave it as go kill yourself now? You know what I'm saying? Is it because it's a better story? Is it because of laziness? Why weren't...
Well, I think... first of all, the movie is great, and everyone listening should see the movie. And Erin does an amazing job. And Erin kind of acted like a journalist because she was there the whole time. She was in court every day. She was, I think, she and her crew rented a house for a little while.
Wow!
So she was doing some of the journalism that people could have done. But the reason is that the job of daily television, and to some extent daily news, is not always fundamentally long-form investigative. It's to give you what happened in court that day. It's to give you what the indictment says. It's to give you the raw information that's getting produced by an event like a trial. And so inevitably, because the defense speaks less and the prosecution has an indictment and has the power of the government, that narrative is what is repeated in the press. And you can see it anytime anyone is indicted. The news story is the contents of the criminal complaint. And so once that was out there, it takes a lot of time to, report and to try to figure out what might be the story behind that story. But I think that's very common. I don't think it's necessarily laziness. I think that's just often how criminal matters are reported, is that the indictment and the complaint become the lead story, and so the prosecution side implicitly is the side that the press communicates. Because,
and that's well said, Jesse, but I just feel like from what we now know to what was first reported, it's such an enormous gap. It's almost unfair to like multiple people. It's like, how could there be this much of a gap? And, it's almost like, I don't know. I just felt like the big picture was, everyone wants in society today their pound of flesh when something goes wrong, and this is one of those cases where, and I think you hinted at this during the documentary, and if I'm wrong, please correct me, but if it's not there, let's create it or let's bend it so it fits the mold, right? It's just like, I don't know. I just felt, I don't know. I was. It's a sad story all the way. There are no winners here, and it's just it made me just sick to my stomach when it was done, just because. Even I didn't know. I mean, I don't think I judged her, off the bat, but I don't know. I just felt, Jesse, when it was all done, it's like, my God, do people know the full scope of the entire of everything that happened?
Yeah, and none of that is to say that what she did is easily excused. I mean, it's really pretty shocking material, and it's a shocking event because. She was, on the phone with him while he was dying. Whether or not she knew that, I don't know. But there's definitely something that went gravely wrong here. It's not that she's, purely a victim of everyone else's misapprehensions, but I do think that what makes this such an interesting thing to write about, and what I found when I was reporting in Massachusetts, was that the question that everyone was asking seemed to me the wrong question. That everyone was asking, why? Why did this girl, who was this pretty blonde high school student, turn on this innocent kid and suddenly out of nowhere kill him? Why? And when I would interview her friends, I went, I lived in Massachusetts for 6 months while I was reporting this. I rented an apartment in New Bedford. So I was in the community a lot, and I went to interview some of her friends from high school, and I would just doorstep people, just get people's information from a, background check service that, reporters pay for, and knock on their doors. And almost everyone, to a person, when I asked them, if you could sit down with Michelle Carter and ask her one question, what would you ask? Said, I would ask, why? Why'd you do it? In other words, there was no question that she had done this horrible thing. Everyone just wanted to know why. But gradually, as I started reporting and reading all the messages, it seemed much more the case that the key question was not why Michelle Carter did what she did. It was what Michelle Carter thought she was doing.
Right. Yes.
That's where it gets really interesting. Was it a murder, or was it a romantic fantasy that went off the rails, or was it somewhere in between? Did she really know? How much did she know? How real did it seem to her? And that's when the story really started to open up to me as a reporter, because I found the Glee material and all of the references and the text message to other stories that seemed to be in her mind. So it seemed that people were kind of asking a more limited question than needed to be asked,
Yeah, that's well said. And the fact that we're not talking about two dead at what is at the time were teenagers is stunning to me, because that easily could have been a road they went down. But there's so much that I want to run through you and by you. There's a part in part one where Lynn Roy was like, we wish we knew what was going on. And it's like, well, wait a second. I know this is a grieving mother. I can't imagine what they've gone through, but she knew at the time that, her son has attempted to kill himself 4 different times. And for her to say kind of like, we wish we knew that this was, he's clearly somebody that is struggling with life. He's struggling to get, by on a daily basis. So I don't know where the confusion came in there, Jesse. I was very confused by that. It's
so. Yeah. So here's the thing about that. A lot of people ask this. The thing that makes this story so modern and interesting, among other things, is that it used to be that if a kid was going through something, or a kid was in trouble, or a kid was depressed or suicidal, it was easier for the parents to know that because the drama had to take place in physical reality, right? In like Rebel Without a Cause, the parents go to the police station. He's there. He's in a physical place. In the typical teen drama of the 50s or 60s or 70s, the kid is slamming the door. Music is blasting in the bedroom while the parents are downstairs at the kitchen table wringing their hands. That's the typical teen drama. You can see it. Now, the kid is sitting next to you at the kitchen table, and that glowing screen is next to them, and it's totally invisible to the parents.
Right.
So my response to how does Lynn not know would be, it's I'm sure she, wakes up every morning regretting that that lapse of her, knowledge about her son. But I would sort of respond to that by saying that's probably more typical than people want to think.
Yeah, no, that's really well said. And, I think a lot about that. But I also think this, I hate making speculations here, but I feel like if Michelle Carter just never existed, I feel like this story still has the same ending. What's your take on that?
Oh, I don't know. That's beyond. I'd have to hand in my journalist card if I speculated on that. I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah. I get it, but I just feel like, I don't know, like, especially part 2 of this documentary, it really opens this up to being more than just a one-way street. This is clearly 2 people that are struggling day to day with mental illness. There's no question about that. I think that's what people come to learn. Is that a fair statement, you think, Jesse?
Yeah, I think Yeah, I think that's broadly a fair statement. Yeah, now I sound like I'm an expert witness. I think you could say that. Yeah, I think that's fair. Sure. Yeah, she was depressed. She had an eating disorder. She had been at McLean's for about a month for an eating disorder before the suicide. So yeah, I think that is fair to say.
You know, and the theme of this whole thing in this documentary, and definitely what you were saying too, is, you know, just opening it up, asking the right questions. You know, what is this all about? I just feel this is a lot of people just doing, I don't want to say half-ass, you know, research, because I really was just taken back by the assistant ADs, the prosecutor. I just felt like they did not look at the big picture. And I am not defending Michelle Carter. I want to say that right off the bat. We know what she is. We know what she did. I'm not saying that, but there's a bigger picture than what has originally been painted, and I don't want to be redundant with that. Well, I'm watching these prosecutors, and I almost feel like it's kind of like a show, and it's, I don't know, and I was watching the Fairhaven Police Department, the two police officers, and they were like, you know, we went home at night, and we looked at 1,000 messages, 60,000 down, whatever. But it's like, wait a second, you went through 1,000 messages, and you never saw a connection here. You never saw a two-sided story here. You never saw Conrad saying things that were, I don't know, like, I just feel like everyone says they knew it was wrong, and she's to blame, but no one did their homework. Like, why did it take Erin and you and other people to kind of look at the bigger picture? This should have been seen way early on. Like, I mean, if you really did analyze all those messages, Jesse, it seems to me it would have been popping out at you that this is, there's so much more to this than just go kill yourself.
Yeah. Well, you know, I think that there's two parts to that question. So the district attorney component is that they have a job to do, which is to win in court. And so they need to find a story that's compelling in court, that's simple, and that they can pull the evidence along. So I think they're just sort of doing their job. We can speak a little more in detail if you want about how that case came to be and why they chose this particular narrative of the case, if that's interesting. But they're doing their job. The question about the cops and them finding this evidence, you know, you have to understand that the community is small down there. So the cops, you know, there's someone in the ADA's office who's a cousin of the Roy family. Everyone knows this family on the south coast of Massachusetts. They run a salvage boat company, which is the proper term for tugboats. Mm-hmm. They are old line Southern Massachusetts people. You'll remember when that plane landed in the Hudson River, the so-called Miracle on the Hudson that was made into that Tom Hanks movie, Captain Sullenberger, right? Yeah. So one of the people who towed that plane to shore was Conrad's father.
Oh, okay.
So they're super ingrained in the community. Gotcha. And here's this tragic death of this young man, the 17-year-old kid, that no one can explain. And then suddenly there's an explanation for it, which is that it's none of their faults. It's Michelle Carter's fault. And I think that whatever you think about the merits of the case, you can completely understand psychologically why that would be a preferable explanation to what happened. It's much easier to believe that it was all to do with Michelle Carter than that it was partly their own fault. So, I mean, I can totally understand why you would want to believe that. And I think when they started to look at the evidence, and, you know, it was like part of the evidence, the really compelling part, the text at the end, offered this irresistible psychological explanation. I'm not even saying it's wrong. I'm just saying I can understand why they were drawn to it. And the other stuff kind of fell away by comparison. I mean, think about it, man. You're a journalist, you're a prosecutor, you're a cop. You have 2 weeks of messages where someone is basically talking about drink bleach, hang yourself, shooting has a 98% chance of working, whatever. And then you have 2 years of messages, hundreds and hundreds of pages that are indecipherable teen drama. I mean, the Glee stuff took me a while to find. That's not obvious, you know? Right. It's not like the cops are sitting, it's not like it was a mess, you know? It's them talking informally, making fun of each other, being jealous, not talking for a while. Did you see the Sox last night? Did you see the Patriots last night? What are you listening to? Are we ever going to have sex? Let's run away to California. I mean, it's the stream of teen life. So it's not so easy to read that and pull the story out of it. But it is easy to read the last 2 weeks and pull the story out of that.
No, that's true. And I almost feel like, I don't know, like, even when they go get the search warrant, I feel like they led her down a road and then they're like, well, now we're taking your phone. Why not just right off the bat, we're taking your phone, what's your, you know what I'm saying? Like, I don't know.
You know what's so crazy? So that's such a good question. So here's what's so crazy about all of this is that they go to her house, they go to the school and she gives them the password to her phone. By the way, do you know what the photo was on the lock screen of her phone?
No.
Conrad.
Wow.
So they go to her school, they get her phone, she gives them the password. Then her dad arrives. They go to the house in Plainville and she gives them the password to her laptop, which gives them access to all the Facebook messages and so on, without ever talking to a lawyer.
Wow. See, that's what I'm saying. Like, why don't you get the search warrant? And you mentioned all the stuff that's out there that even you had to. Why not do all that homework before you get the search warrant? Like, nothing's going to expire anytime soon. Why didn't they take their time to say, you know what? Let's do our homework on this. Maybe there's more to this than just those obvious things. You see what I'm saying? Like, I don't know. I get that it's they have to do their job. They're police. Let's get this done and over with. But
do you think? Let me answer your question with a question. Like, do you think that if they had, if they had found all the stuff that I found and Erin found and the mitigating circumstances or the Glee episodes or whatever, and to be clear, I'm not like taking a position necessarily on. The case, although I do have opinions about it, but do you think that would have changed the core of their legal argument? I mean, isn't their legal argument basically to do with those texts in the last month, last 2 weeks?
Yeah, but that's a great question, and I hope I can answer that. I have to tell you, I think the mindset of the media, of the process. I kept saying ADs, it's DA. I'm so sorry for that. And, looking at the prosecutors, looking at the police, looking at the media, looking at the judges, looking at that ridiculous Supreme Court argument, I feel like everybody had that same attitude. Look at these messages. Not let's look at the big picture. And I hate sounding redundant, but unfortunately, it would not have changed because people were going to get their pound of flesh no matter what this was about. Because those messages, they were disgusting. They were awful. I cannot defend her. But I also know that these are two mentally ill people in one way or another. And I just wish more homework would have been done by everybody involved and not this rush to let's just get this over and done with. And going to does that make any sense? Or am I way off with that, Jesse?
No. I mean, I understand the impulse that you're describing, but it took a long time, I feel like you're underestimating how winding and crazy this court case was. Like, Conrad Roy died in July of 2014, and the case was tried in the summer of 2017.
So 3 years. Yeah.
So that's a long time. And in that time, it sort of pinballed all around the Massachusetts state court system. It went to the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court, and they declined to dismiss the case. There was a lot of legal wrangling, that had to go on. So by the time it was in court, it had been worked over pretty well. I guess the thing you're describing, which is interesting, is that there really is a big difference between what is admissible in court and what is admissible to a journalist or to a writer or a documentarian. A lot of the material in the article, was inadmissible for a million different reasons. It fell beyond the scope of the time period that the judge wanted to look at, or it would run afoul of hearsay rules. Courts are very circumscribed, very rule-bound environments. I mean, it's an obvious thing to say, but it's not so easy to get stuff into court and to change a story that's in front of a judge, whereas a journalist has a little more flexibility. So I totally understand the impulse that you're describing, but I think it's why we like, articles and documentaries and whatever, because they can give more of a perspective than a legal case can always.
Yeah, and absolutely. And 95% of the world in this case that knew about it, they were all operating on half stories, right? What they knew about just, what she said in those texts. Then you have Nancy Grace getting people going. And it's just, I don't know, like the public perception, everything else was skewed by most people not knowing the big picture. And if it did take 3 years, which it obviously did to develop into a case from 14 to 17, if the public knew what I think now, just from talking to you, that the prosecutors, I think, figured out what, him trying to kill himself 4 times and, the fact that dad did, give him a concussion. There's other things that went along that many people did not know about. I don't know, I just feel like even in public perception, it would have changed it a little bit because, I don't know, does that make sense? Do you think that would have affected it at all?
I don't know. I think you're getting into the core of the kind of conundrum that the case poses. Does the fact that someone tried to kill themselves before their death mean that, the person who encouraged them to do it the second time is not culpable? I'll tell you, can I go into the weeds a little bit of the law for a second?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so there's a really interesting case in Massachusetts that's relevant to Michelle Carter. And it's the case of a man named Jewett, Jewett. And in that case, which occurred in 1815, a man named Jewett killed himself in jail in Massachusetts the night before he was going to be publicly hanged for having murdered his own father. The prison guards later told a jury, when a criminal case was brought, that there was a petty thief in the cell next to Jewett, and that Jewett had been persuaded, had been goaded, had been cajoled by this petty thief relentlessly in the night before he was going to be hanged. Why let the hangman have his fee and that kind of stuff? And then the hangman was paid in those days. And the case went before a judge and jury, and the state said this is manslaughter. And they present their arguments. The judge then turns to the jury to give them instructions before they deliberate. And of course, the core of the case is that this guy is a dead man walking. He's going to be hanged in 6 hours, no matter what, right? Even if this guy hadn't persuaded him. So he hanged himself just hours before the state would have killed him. Dead man walking. And the judge instructs the jury that they can't consider at all the impending death of Jewett as a mitigating factor, because even a condemned man is, I think the judge said, cheered by hope to the last moments of his existence. The jury in that case voted to acquit. Of course, there was no text message record to prove that Jewett had been persuaded, but that really gets to the core of the moral dilemma. Because the judge in the Michelle Carter case, I don't think this is in the movie, but when he announced his verdict, the precedent case that he talked about, the case of Jewett from 1815.
Right.
And what he was saying was that it doesn't matter if Conrad was going to kill himself an hour later. It doesn't matter if he had planned to shoot himself 15 minutes after she called him. We can't consider that legally in making our decision. And so the law is sort of on the side of, is a little bit on the side sort of against what you were saying, that it doesn't matter. You could attempted to kill yourself before, and you could be planning to kill yourself an hour into the future. And it doesn't matter from a legal or moral standpoint in the state of Massachusetts. Pretty wild.
Yeah, I mean, that's fascinating. I mean, I guess I get that, but like I feel like, speaking of that judge, I felt like when he, especially in the documentary, when he is giving his rulings, he goes down one way and then pulls a sharp U on everything he said. I don't know. I had a big issue.
Right. It was a shocking moment in court. It was it was like all of the journalists in court were getting ready to type their Michelle Carter acquitted tweets.
Yes.
And then you could see everyone's thumbs hover. Wait. Yeah.
I can't, as a journalist, I can't even imagine what it was like listening to this judge because, and this is, I guess, what I'm saying. I felt like the prosecutors, I felt like the judge, I felt like they were playing to the infamy of the case. I don't know. Why not just say, this is exactly what I mean? Not just, okay, I'm going down this road. Oh, whoa, wait a second. Now I mean this. So it's like a lot of people, and as awful as she is and she was, and what she did, you're playing with somebody's emotions, I feel like, as a judge here. I don't know. It was just beyond frustrating. I found this judge beyond frustrating, Jesse. I have to be very, very honest with you.
Yeah, you weren't a fan of Moniz. I mean, that man had a really hard job, I think. He in fact was a former high school teacher, if you can believe that.
Wow.
So this was not his first go round with trying to sort out complex circumstances surrounding teenagers. But I think he had a hard job. I think he was actually planning to retire after this case. It's the center of media firestorm. Everyone in the community is talking about it. And I think he wanted to leave a record knowing that the case would be appealed. I think that was partly what was happening, is that he knew it would go to the appellate court.
Right.
And he wanted to have as much in the record as possible to explain his decision. And of course, she lost her appeal within the state court system.
Yeah, and the other judge I want to talk about, and they never, at least I didn't see his name in a documentary, was the Supreme Court. And I felt like, I think the other attorney, Michelle's other attorney, Dana Curran, is that his name? I thought he did a phenomenal job presenting the case to the Supreme Court, to the point where you look at the other Supreme Court justices and they're nodding in agreement for what he is saying about what constitutes somebody, pushing somebody over the edge to kill themselves. I really felt I don't know what the correct terminology would be. I really thought he made his case and then some, where the lead Supreme Court justice or the guy doing most of the talking, I should say. I felt like he failed in trying to connect the dots. I did. I felt like he wasn't making, again, another person trying to make a point on just a portion of the facts. Does that make any sense, Jesse?
You're talking about the arguments before the state Supreme Court, the Supreme Judicial Court in Massachusetts.
The state Supreme Court, yes, where he's talking and the guy's talking. He's making the analogy of a gun, and I really felt like Dana did a great job just backing up and saying, okay, so this is, and there gets to a point when you're watching a documentary where you're looking at the other justices and they're nodding in agreement to what Dana is saying. So I don't know. I just feel like a lot of people were running with this, and weren't. No matter what the defense said, people had their mind made up. I think long in advance. I think.
I don't know if we can say that of the judge. I think that you have to remember that this took place over a long time, and I think you have to remember that there was not the real media hailstorm fell on Massachusetts during the summer of the trial, which was the summer of 2017. Until then, there was, and that's when you had helicopters from foreign news organizations over the courthouse and people pushing each other and tripping over each other. I mean, it was a madhouse. But before that, the case had generated a lot of interest, and she was on the cover of People magazine, and obviously everyone was devastated for Conrad's family and so on. But it wasn't international news, and so I'm not sure that the pressures that I'm not sure. I mean, I think Moniz definitely would have felt that pressure, but the justices who sit on the Supreme Judicial Court, who probably are not necessarily grabbing a People magazine at the supermarket checkout, I'm not sure how deeply swayed they were by the media thing. I think the reason the case is so difficult is that clearly there are forms of speech that are unprotected. A true threat is unprotected. There was a case in Massachusetts where a guy told his wife how to take the safety off a gun. She had expressed the desire to kill herself, and she took the safety off and shot herself, and he was prosecuted for manslaughter. If you order a hit on someone, that's a speech act. Right. If I text you to kill someone and you do it, I mean, it's just a text message, but clearly that's a criminal speech act. So there's no question that some forms of speech and even some forms of digital speech can be criminal, I think, in the law. The reason that this is such a tangled case partly is that, one, there was, no record of the actual phone call that happened while he was dying. And two, assisting suicide is not a crime in Massachusetts. Encouraging suicide is not a crime. There's some states where it is, but not in Massachusetts. So it was unclear that in a normal felony speech act prosecution, there's an underlying crime. In other words, if I'm, threatening you, a true threat is criminal. There's an underlying crime. If I'm organizing a hit on someone, there's an underlying crime, which is homicide, which I'm using a text message to accomplish. In this case, it was not totally clear that there's an underlying crime because assisting suicide is not criminalized in Massachusetts. So that's why you're in this position of, and forgive me if this is like way far off the trail. I love this is where it gets really interesting. Like to me, I mean, the underlying act was not criminal. So there's no statutory crime. There's no law in Massachusetts that says you can't send someone a text message persuading them to kill themselves. So that means that instead of prosecuting it statutorily, they had to prosecute it under common law, which is, manslaughter, right? Manslaughter is a common law charge. And what common law means is that it, descends from Old English jurisprudence and so on, but it means that it's not enumerated. It's not like bullet points. It's not like these 102 things are involuntary manslaughter. Instead, it's behavior that's wanton and reckless that a reasonable person would know would cause someone's death. Well, what's wanton and reckless? What does that mean? And so if you're reading the law and you're trying to figure out whether this behavior falls under this definition, wanton and reckless, that's where, your judgment starts to get tangled and you really get tested as a jurist or as a journalist or as just an observer, because, it's not a clear enumerated law where you can say, well, it's interstate, a RICO felony if you wire $10,000 or more across state lines, and you wired 10,001. Therefore, this is that crime. This is much more interpretive and hard to pin down. And so I think that it's one reason why it's so fascinating to continue to think about.
No, that's well said. And what else, Jesse, is the fact that, this does opens, I don't want to say Pandora's box, that might be over the top, but it does open the door for things moving forward where people, if they say something to somebody and somebody, follows through on, an act that takes their own lives, this has created a bit of a mess, I think, a potential mess, I should say. Is there any validity to that, you think?
Well, I think we don't know because we are still in the realm of state court. So there's no national this is not yet a national precedent-setting case.
Right.
If the Supreme Court takes it and they rule one way or the other, then that will be legal precedent. But so far, this is, Massachusetts. So yeah, it could set a precedent in Massachusetts. But keep in mind that this is like the idea that this is some big precedent-setting thing is not really an accurate description of what the law is, because it's not statutory.
Right.
And it's not federal court. It's just them saying that this can fall under involuntary manslaughter. But for it to do that, it has to satisfy this condition of being wanton and reckless. And part of what made this wanton and reckless and what the state was arguing in this kind of amazing, argument in court was that, as Katie Rayburn, the ADA, put it, words of love can be reckless, Your Honor. That it was something about the closeness of their relationship that contributed to the recklessness of the conduct. So it would not be the same as me texting you, walk off a bridge or something and you doing it. It had something to do with their relationship being intimate. That's what made it reckless in the eyes of the prosecutor, and I would guess in the eyes of the judge too.
And I have to say, Jesse, they have these conversations over a 1.5, 2-year period where he's tried to take his life 4 times. He's telling her, you better not tell anybody, that about any of this. So and she's and the doctor and makes a great point of this. He's pouring. He said, I think he makes the analogy of a triangle or a pyramid. He says they're pouring all this stuff, and at the end of it, I mean, this is a 1.5 years, and I want to make it clear that I am not defending Michelle Carter in any way, shape, or form. I think my only point during this whole thing is there is a bigger story here than most people who know about this case realize. And one of the beautiful things that Erin Lee Carr did was she opened it up to say to people, look at the entire picture, not just a fragment of it, the worst part. And there's no defending that fragment. You can't defend what she did. Like, being an awful person and being somebody that should be in jail, I think sometimes are 2 different things. But I don't know. I just feel like, for a 1.5 years there, and she makes a point of showing this, is that she was talking him off a ledge non-stop. And if somebody's mentally ill and somebody really wants to kill, another person really wants to kill themselves, and you care for that person, I feel like in her warped little world, she said, you know what? Maybe this is me, and this is going to sound ridiculous saying this, but maybe my gift to him, maybe my friendship to him, my love for him is giving him what he really wants, and that is to die. Is that a crazy point to say that?
Well, I think you're talking about Peter Breggin, the psychiatrist, right?
Yes,
that's what he was arguing.
Yeah. That's what the doctor was saying. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I'm a little bit of a Breggin skeptic, and I think that I'm not sure about that story. It's definitely not my version of it. I guess I don't know for sure that that's not what she was thinking, but. I'm slightly skeptical of Peter Breggin because, I mean, first of all, Peter Breggin is a paid expert witness, and his job is basically,
yes, absolutely, yeah,
and that's his job, right? He goes into court and he says he's written books of like his cases of like this guy, this priest killed his wife, but he was on 10 milligrams of Prozac, so it's Prozac's fault or whatever. So that's his sort of angle on the world, and so. It's not as though he's coming at this. It's like if you brought if you bring ingredients over to your friend's house, and your friend is a vegan who hates to use spices in his cooking and doesn't drink alcohol and whatever, he's going to make those ingredients into like a salad with no like meat in the salad. You know that's what he's going to cook.
Right.
That's what you're going to eat when you're at that person's house.
Right.
It's not like, so that's like bringing legal documents to Breggin. You know what he's going to cook. You bring him the ingredients, but you know what dish it is that he's going to make. He's going to make a dish where there's a terrible analogy. I don't know how I got into this dish thing.
No, but I get
what he's going to. What he's going to do, right? He always so it's not as though he's necessarily coming to this cold, uninterested, or I should say disinterested. And so I think there's like some skepticism that's required, of his arguments. I think it's a compelling story. I think that, everyone can decide if they believe it. It's not the story that I believe, but I get why Breggin, what Breggin had to do was basically explain, because Breggin had to explain why after July 2nd, Michelle goes from basically saying you need to get help, you need to go to the hospital, to saying shoot yourself.
Right.
And the way that he explained that was with this theory of involuntary intoxication, that she was on Celexa, and Celexa made her temporarily insane, effectively. So in order to make that theory coherent on its own terms, he had to describe like why it is that the way that her insanity manifested was through encouraging him to commit suicide. And the thing he came up with was that Michelle always wanted to help everyone. And so that, part of her nature was exacerbated or somehow twisted like a gnarled apple into this horrible manifestation. But I don't really, in my article, I don't, really endorse the involuntary intoxication theory. So I'm not sure that I can get on board with that argument. But I think that's where Bregan is coming from, is his job is to go into a case and to do this thing to the case.
Yeah, that's really well said. And one of the things that I thought, and kind of piggybacking off of that, was that Dana Curran, when he was explaining to the state Supreme Court justice, he was saying, there's, and I hope I have this right, he was saying there's a huge difference between actually being there saying, you get back in that car, to saying it in a text message, you should do it. He was trying to make there's a huge difference. And that's when I saw a few of the other justices kind of nodding in agreement with him. So I don't know. I just feel like there's...
How different do you think that really is? And why is that? So could you put your finger on why that's so different? I mean, most people under 25 are communicating. The majority of their communication is occurring via phone.
See, here's where you and I not disagree, but here's what I think is irrelevant in this case, because
no, we can disagree. I want
no, not so much in a disagreement with you, but like, in other words, so I think Conrad's past plays a huge part in what happened at the end, and in the eyes of the law, I think it's irrelevant. I think what she did in those text messages saying, "Get back in the car," were the only thing that mattered. I think that's the only, like, the fact that his past of wanting, kill him, trying to commit suicide 4 times, that his screenshots that his family knew about that said ways to kill yourself, telling her to shut her mouth, talking about Romeo and Juliet. I think all that stuff is enormous. I think it's huge. Like, I think from a purely just legal point, watching an attorney and crime and justice being played out, I thought, and I hope I'm pronouncing his name right, Joe Cataldo, her defense attorney, was nothing short of amazing. Just as a defense attorney, I'm not talking about the case. I thought he did an amazing job throwing his point out there and saying, we're just bending things to fit a mold and going from there. I don't know. Is any of that coherent, Jesse?
Yeah,
am I making any sense?
Sure. I mean, yeah. I mean, I totally understand what you're saying. I think Cataldo had his work cut out for him. But yeah, I mean, I think that he obviously had the challenge of presenting a compelling story that was powerful enough to refute the states or to replace the states. And essentially what he did was inverted the state story, right? He did the photo negative of the state story, because the state was saying this innocent boy, Conrad, was lured into this suicidal maelstrom by this evil girl, Michelle. And what Cataldo was saying was this innocent girl, Michelle, was lured into the suicidal maelstrom by this depressed boy, Conrad. They're the exact mirror image stories, right? And obviously, in the end, the judge found the state story more compelling. But I think that you are accurately describing what it was that Cataldo did and had to do.
And I don't know that her mental illness, do you think it played a part in the sentencing? Do you think the judge is like, she certainly is mentally ill? That's a part in this. Was that ever considered, you think?
Well, the judge said that he did not find Bregan's testimony compelling. I think that was his word, or convincing. So I don't think that factored into his opinion. He said that in open court.
And I have to say, and this is not, I hope I'm not going off the beaten path here, but so like in politics, right? And I've removed myself from, I can't just, it's just like banging your head against the wall. I can't do it anymore. And, one of the things is, so when like Trump makes a statement, right? And it's an awful statement to people, it's clearly like ridiculous. When people fire back and say how, if he's being whatever, it's always 100 times worse. When they're talking about an unkind president, their message is 500 times worse. It's hateful. When they're talking about a person that like is not a good person, the president, their message in reply is 100 times worse than what the president said. And I feel like Michelle Carter here.
Derek, I'm not sure I can really let that just hang as though that's a fact. I mean, that's just not true. I mean, the idea that, I mean, Trump is a special case, because when he's, talking about, go back to your country, or, you don't want people from, shithole countries. I mean, it's setting the temperature so high to begin with. I'm not sure you can.
No, Jesse, I totally agree. Let me finish, and maybe it'll make more sense. So,
okay.
So yeah, his statements are ridiculous, but I feel like the replies to those statements are even worse. So it's like, I feel like
that's not, you can't say that. I mean, we're going to get off in the weeds, but that's fine. But you can't do that because you're totally removing the systemic power from that analysis. So Trump is the most powerful man in the world.
Right.
So if he says something, it weighs so much more than anything. So you can't compare someone saying something vitriolic on Twitter because that person has no structural power compared to Trump. So I just don't think that comparison holds up. I mean, I don't want to get in a whole political thing.
No, and I'm glad.
I just don't think that's right.
No, but like, so I guess what I'm saying is, so if I'm somebody that is talking about kindness and talking about equality and talking about, whatever, and Trump makes a ridiculous statement, I can't come back as you're a piece of shit, you're this, you're that, and then go on another Twitter and say and continue to preach kindness. Like, I feel like there are better, and this is leading somewhere. I'm not just leaving this here. I just feel like there's other ways to come back at a person who's ignorant, like some of the ignorant statements our president has been making, versus, these over the top. Like, I just feel like two wrongs don't make a right. And I feel like with Michelle Carter, she did something horrible, and people came back at her with "Go kill yourself. You're this, you're that." I don't know. I just feel like we preach one way of life, and then in our dealings with people, sometimes we kind of follow the same things that we loathe about the people that we reply to. So yeah, I'm not talking politics. I'm purely down the middle. I'm not trying to, and I guess my point is lost, but I don't know. I just feel like.
Well, I think I get your point. I just really vehemently disagree with it, which is that
but that's okay.
I agree. Yeah, I agree. But let me disagree. Let me say what I'm going to say. So
okay.
The difference is this, right? It's like where you are in the system matters for your speech.
Right.
Your position in the system matters. And it gives your speech weight and power, or it strips those things from your speech. So Trump is a good example because Trump is the most powerful person in the world. His speech really matters. There's a huge amount of weight. He has the power of a military behind him. He can expose people to incredible danger, to vitriol, to and so on. And any president could. I'm not saying that any head of state can do that. So his speech has a lot of weight, and he has added responsibilities for his speech. With a case like the Michelle Carter, and her sort of online, critics or whatever, I think your point applies better to something like that, because then there's not this crazy systems power imbalance. And I agree with you that it can be jarring to watch people tell Michelle Carter to kill herself, in order to teach her a lesson about Conrad suicide.
Right,
and in fact, I saw, there was someone who, I think it was on Reddit or on Twitter, someone sent me, someone saying if one of, Michelle Carter, God forbid, if Michelle Carter, killed herself because someone had told her to kill himself, would that person have to go to jail under their own logic or something like that? And I think that's true. I mean, this case obviously exposed a huge amount of, of anger that people had. And there was this is online culture, this sort of hyperbolic, very angry, aspect of online culture that we totally saw here. There's no question. I just don't think you can apply that back into the political arena because you have to talk about political power.
If I go back 10 minutes in time, I would have said, you know what?
No, it's good. You should leave this in too.
I'm not editing it out. But what I should have said was, it's ironic that people were appalled by, and this is, it's ironic that people were appalled by what she did, yet there's other people telling her to go. You know what I'm saying? Those same people are telling her to go kill herself. That's what I should have said. I should never.
It's a contradiction.
Yeah. I get that. Yeah. There's a scene in Anchorman where he drinks milk. He goes, "That was a bad choice." Bringing up Trump, that was a bad choice.
No. It's good. It's interesting. It was interesting. But I think that you're right. There's a contradiction there for sure.
So let me ask you. And if you don't want to answer this, I get it. You're a journalist. You're down the middle. You're well thought out. You're well written. What would you have sentenced her to?
I don't know. I think I have to pass on that question. I don't know. I mean, I do think that it's clear that it's clear that this case is ahead of the law. And the first people who would say that are, I think, Conrad's family, who are trying to get a law passed right now in Massachusetts called Conrad's Law, which would criminalize exactly this behavior. So, let's just sort of step back a tiny bit. Technology advances kind of exponentially, gets better and faster and more complicated all the time. The law advances only incrementally, little steps at a time, and often it reverses. So inevitably, the gap between technology and the law is widening all the time, only gets bigger. And this is a case that's right on the frontier of that region, that space between the law and what technology can do. And that's why it's so interesting to keep thinking about. So I don't know what I would have sentenced her to, but I do think that it's clear that it's a little bit ahead of the law, and that's why they want a law passed in Massachusetts. They're saying there should be a law that directly addresses this, and there isn't now.
Yeah, and I asked that unfairly. Let me rephrase that. Do you think Conrad's family and many people that are involved with the case think 15 months was an appropriate punishment?
Oh, I would think that Conrad's family probably would have been happy to see her get 20 years.
Right. Okay. Yeah, and that's kind of where I was going with it. Yeah.
Well, maybe that's not true. I think what they asked for was between 7 and 12, and I think Conrad's family was generally supportive of the state, so they probably would have been. They probably would rather have seen her get something in the range of 7 to 12.
Do you think that this? Is the rest of her life just ruined, you think? Is any of it redeemable? Can she do anything to change public perception, you think, Jesse? Is there a way she can repair the damage she's done?
I think there's always a way that people can use their lives for good. I mean, I think she's very young, and the idea of punishing juveniles is not to, theoretically, is not to throw away the key and destroy someone's life forever, but
right.
to
That's well said. Yes,
be really, rehabilitative, and that's what Judge Moniz talked about during sentencing. And the thing that complicates it, the sort of crazy, sort of tragedy of this, is that it's not as though you had two teenagers who fucked up and they're both going to be punished, but ultimately they'll both outgrow it. Right. Conrad's dead, so he'll never have the option to do that, and it makes it more complicated to sort of think it through. But no, I think ideally the criminal justice system does not permanently destroy the lives of youthful offenders. But of course, there's a lot of stuff that plays into that, right? I mean, there's race, there's class issues that, she'll have opportunities that other people wouldn't have. But no, do I think her life should be, permanently destroyed? I don't. And I don't think that Judge Moniz thinks that either, or that the justice system is designed to do that.
I have one other tough question for you. Do you think in her mind she thinks that she did wrong here? Do you think that she realizes that, she made a huge mistake?
I don't know. No one has spoken to her. This is like, I have to keep an eye on my journalist card, I don't know.
Right.
And I can't speculate without talking to someone. So, I know that's an unsatisfying answer, but, I just don't know. Michelle Carter has not given interviews to anyone. So no one knows. No one really knows.
When people see this documentary and they talk to you, Jesse, whether it's in your personal life or people that know your fantastic work that you do, in multiple platforms, what's the question or two that you get most often about this case?
Oh, do you think she should have gone to jail?
Yeah, that's what I thought. Okay, yeah, and is there? I mean, from a professional standpoint, I mean, because you come across, for anybody who hasn't seen it, Jesse comes across. And I'm not trying to patronize you. You just come across really well thought out as you do in this interview. What was your take on just the seeing yourself in a documentary? I mean, that's a testament, I believe, to your hard work, to your being a reputable journalist. What was your personal take from professionally, not so much about the case, but just being in a documentary and dealing with Erin and the whole process.
Well, Erin was great. I mean, Erin and I have a great working relationship, and I'll tell you, the process of making this was interesting because I lived in Massachusetts. I had been totally involved in this case. My wife, who's a great writer and editor, had been talking to me about this case all the time and contributing ideas and looking at versions of the story. So it had been involved in my personal life in that way for months. Sarah Nicole, my wife, is brilliant, and we would talk about the case, and she would provide, insight about Michelle, and it was sort of part of my domestic life in that way, my personal life. But then 2 years passed between when I shot the documentary interview and when it came out, because the documentary interview was shot the fall after the case, and so it's weird to have that thing sort of come out. Now I've written other stuff. My mind has wandered a little bit from the case, but I would say there was this intense experience that we all had. Everyone who was there working on it, Erin, me, the other journalists who were there, my wife Sarah, and then to have it kind of come out now and get this response has been amazing. I mean, it's been great to see people wrestle with it, and I'm really, happy for Erin and proud of Erin for having executed this thing. And I guess the other thing I took away from it is that it's better to shave before you do on-camera interview. But it's too late to fix that. But next time I'll shave closer. No,
man, you look great, and you really. I'm telling you, and I told you this off the air. My girlfriend and I were watching this. We're like, this is one of the only well thought out people in this whole thing. He's breaking it down without judgment. You clearly dedicate your life to journalism. You rented out a place. You were back in Massachusetts, doing your thing. So you're tuned into this case. Is there anything you learned from the documentary? I mean, outside of you probably should have shaved. Is there anything? And I have a full beard, by the way. Is there anything? Okay. Is there anything that that you learned from what Erin put together that you're like, oh my god, I didn't know that? Like something that was like just blew you away or.
Yeah, you know what? There was two things that really blew me away that she did that were great. One thing is that she shot the testimony. The witness testimony of the girls that Michelle was friends with, who kind of one after another go up in front of court to testify for the state, and she shot it in a way that you could see how important the kind of high school relationships were to Michelle, and sort of watch that parade of the girls one after another say that they had nothing to do with her and that they didn't hang out with her and so on, and that was really interesting to see. And then to me, some of the most powerful footage of the movie is in the first half of watching the Roy family and watching Lynn is really powerful in it. Conrad's father, kind of describing the fight that they had and his own kind of understanding of what that was, him crying, the grandparents. I mean, the whole impact on the Roy family is so visible in the first half. And it's powerful. You know, you feel their grief over their son, and you're with them as they try to make sense of this inexplicable event. And then the second half tries to make sense of it. But I thought that the first half was so powerful with what, you know, watching the family describe Conrad and describe learning what had happened between Michelle and Conrad. I thought Erin did an amazing job with that.
Oh, I totally agree, and that's well said. And you know, I thought it was just really well put together. And you know, one of the things that, you know, when I was watching it, you know, and I'm watching, you know, Conrad, you know, he's talking to the computer. He does a few of these, you know, I don't know if it's like a vlog or something comparable where he's just talking, and all I kept thinking was, what a handsome kid, what a funny kid, what a smart kid. He's clearly loved by friends and family. I don't know. I just was left with, this is just all about loss. It's just what an incredible. I don't know. I was just so, because you wonder what this kid could have done in life, because he clearly had all these wonderful gifts. You know, just a good soul. You know, who was like all of us. You know, flawed in many ways. But I don't know. I just feel like all I kept thinking about was just, you know, without, you know, going, this person's fault or that person. At the core of this all, Jesse, is just. It's just loss and heartbreak.
I think that's well said. Well said. Yeah.
On to your professional life. Sorry, is there anything you wanted to promote or get out there? Because you are on a just looking at your website, which I loved going through. Anything coming up? Anything you're writing about that you wanted to promote? Get out there.
Oh, that's an interesting question. I don't know if I have anything to promote yet. I'm working on a piece right now. I'm working on two pieces, but they're not done. I don't know if I can promote them. I think I just have to sort of vaguely say that I have interesting stuff in the works, but I'm superstitious that if I talk about something before it's done, it won't get written for some reason. So I just don't really.
I get it.
Don't really. It's just, I can't explain it. There's just a, and most writers I think are the same. It's like, if you start talking about it, then you don't need to write it anymore and you don't do it. So I'm just going to forego the opportunity to promote myself. But I do have other stuff coming out that I'm working on. I can't really talk about it yet.
I have to say, you've given me over an hour of your time, and I really hope you come back on it. I really love talking to you, Jesse. You're so articulate. You're so fun. You're a good person. I do hope you come back on down the road. I do have one final question for you. So this is kind of mostly a movie TV podcast. What are some of your favorite crime or courtroom movies that you've seen, or it could be a TV show that you just love? I mean, as a journalist, I mean, you're probably in tune to some of that. Is there anything that you've seen that you absolutely adore from that point of view, from an entertainment point of view?
I mean, I thought the OJ documentary was one of the best ones that's come out recently, that had some real original reporting in it, and was so socially intelligent about the context of that case. So I thought that was a real high watermark. Erin Carr's movie about Gypsy Blanchard, for anyone who hasn't seen it, Mommy, Dead, and Dearest, is really extraordinary, about the young woman who it's the thing that it's a young woman who has Munchausen by proxy. Her mother thinks she's sick, but she's not really sick, and she gets her boyfriend to murder her mother. And Erin interviews her in jail. That's a great one. And also, I don't know. I love you now, Die on HBO.
Yeah, well said. And I lied. I do have one more question. So you do cover a lot of crime. As you know, we talked about obviously this case. Does it ever get to you, like some of the depths of humanity and not always the brightest of lights? Does it ever get to you as a writer? I know you're a professional. You're a journalist. You do your job very well. But does it ever wear on you when you have to read about or research about just some really, really deplorable things? Does it ever wear on you as a human being?
I mean, I don't cover that. I don't cover enough of this kind of story, I think, to honestly say that I'm exposed to that level. But I think that with this case, Yeah, I did. I mean, I lived with this case for a long time, you know, and it was a lot of time with these kids and with these families. And you feel, you sort of, you go through it in a weird way because you feel both, you know, close to it and you experience it and it's emotional. But then you also, the deeper you get into it, the graver your responsibility is to render it correctly. And you know that the people you write about will read what you write. And so I think it's a, you know, it's a heavy responsibility. And I find that almost more terrifying in a certain way, is like than the actual crime or the subject matter, is the obligation to do something with it that's, you know, humane and intelligent and so on. And I'm not saying my stuff is, but that's what I aspire to do. And I think that's its own kind of pressure. But, you know, I don't think I can. You'd have to ask Erin. She does more dark stuff than I do. Yeah, I don't know. That's a question for Erin. You can have her on and ask her that.
Jesse Barron, I cannot thank you enough for coming on today. You were everything I thought you'd be, and then some. Thank you so much, Jesse, for coming on the podcast today.
Thank you so much, Derek. My pleasure.